An area that was closed to shellfishing earlier this week due to a fuel spill has been reopened. To learn more, Channel 18's Sarah Colvin talks with Natural Resource Officer Amy Croteau. On this episode of Barnstable Today, it's Friday, March 4th, 2016. I'm Sarah Mantle.
Although we're talking about something a little different than last week, we're going to talk about a fuel spill that happened on Wednesday, I believe.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about what happened in this incident.
Okay, so it was initially reported to COMM, the fire department, Cotuit, Osterville, Marston's Mills, by the the violator, we'll say. It was a diesel fuel leak from a vehicle that was initially just on a road. However, that vehicle was traveling to Oyster Harbor, and therefore went over the bridge on Bridge Street, and then that's how my department becomes involved, is that there was spillage into our embayments, which triggers sort of a whole system of events on our end of things. So COM was nice enough to notify us as well as DEP, and then when these sorts of reports come into the Harbor Master office, which is typically how that goes, if you see something in the water that you think is a spill, or if you've had a spill, you typically report it to the Harbor Master office or to the U.S. Coast Guard National Response Center. I can give you the number for that later. And when we get that call, we then notify the Board of Health and Division Marine Fisheries. When Division Marine Fisheries has a very important role to play, it was reported as less than 5 gallons, but the severity of the spill had not yet been determined officially, and the spill happened at a very awkward time. We were having heavy rain, heavy wind, and we were on a outgoing tide on a day that just also happens to be a recreational shellfishing and commercial shellfishing day. So a number of sort of things were all going on at once and in a very short period of time. So it was necessary to have all of the departments working together to figure out what sort of action was going to be taken. And that's, that waiting period in between. Absolutely. The Division of Marine Fisheries always takes a very cautious tone when dealing with these sorts of things. And given the sort of scope of the situation, they determined that the best thing to do would be to close a number of areas to shellfishing immediately until they could determine sort of the severity of the situation.
Indeed. So really closed as a precaution. I think no one would want to harvest shellfish that could in any way be contaminated. So as you say, best course of action to just close the area as a precaution while further investigation takes place.
Exactly, because you have to look at it, when you have people recreationally shellfishing, you don't want to take the chance that somebody's going to eat something that's not going to be a good product. When you look at it from the commercial and from our aquaculture grant holders end of things, they don't want product going to market that's not any good. It could be a bad reflection on them. The market, if there was a closure that they didn't know about, would probably not even take the product. So you want to get that information out to the public as quickly as you possibly can, which also triggers a whole sequence of events. Initially, when we found out from Division of Marine Fisheries that the closure was going to be in effect, we had to sort of get it up on the website, get it out on Channel 18, and then we had to call every single grant holder that's in the area that was within the closure to notify them that they couldn't harvest anything from their grants that day. We had to walk the shorelines because it happened right around low tide, kicking recreational and commercial shellfishermen and women out of the water and confiscating their catches, making sure that everything was returned to the water. After that, we had to call the long list of commercial shellfishermen in town. There's maybe only 10 people that are actively shellfishing this time of year, but you have to notify everyone when there's a closure, so it was a lot of phone calls. And Jim Benoit over at IS was nice enough to put together on the fly a map for me showing the areas that were closed so we could post them at all of the local shellfish kiosks. We also sent out an email to our volunteers. It was posted on the bar's website. It was posted on the town's Facebook page. The spill itself actually got a little bit of publicity locally, and even though it ended up not being a tremendously big deal, we were very happy that we were able to get all of that information out to as many people as we did, because like I said, if it had been more severe, you want to make sure that everybody is notified as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And again, the protection of everyone who's going to be consuming that shellfish, certainly of the utmost, importance. But amazing to think about all of the communication that you and the staff need to do to make sure that everybody is aware of this. It's pretty impressive that you were able to get the word out as quickly as you were. And it seems like everyone was in compliance.
Yeah, I mean, when you have what's considered, an environmental emergency like that, when we have something like a rainfall closure in town, it's usually something that we see coming a mile away. In this town specifically, if we get any more than 4 inches of rainfall in a 24-hour period, because of the runoff and because all of that goes into shellfish beds, there's an automatic closure, a rainfall closure at that point that goes for at least, it's usually 5 days before they can get out to do water testing from the state to reopen areas. But you typically see something like that coming a mile away, You don't necessarily see something like a spill happening until it's already happened, and then you have to, be quick to deal with it.
Absolutely, yes. We can predict kind of the weather with some degree of accuracy, or at least a little bit of warning. But something like what happened on Wednesday with a fuel spill, you just you never know when that's going to happen.
Exactly.
Absolutely. So in terms of rainfall closures, what's the kind of communications protocol? Do you follow a similar communications protocol? I would assume that because you have a little bit of advance notice, it's not as scramble worthy as this particular situation.
Yeah, exactly. It's much more simple. We simply just wait for a call from Division of Marine Fisheries, sort of basically telling us that we're going to have a rainfall closure. And then it's still, when we have a rainfall closure, it's typically the entire town that is closed to shellfishing. So versus Wednesday, when it was just North Bay, West Bay, that was closed, so there's a shorter list of people to contact. When we have an entire town that's closed to shellfishing, you have to call every single leaseholder. You have to post every single landing. And we have a lot of landings that don't have shellfish kiosks. So we have a number of postings that are sort of like at boat ramps or at these tiny little nooks and crannies that we know that we routinely check people. So it can be a little bit more tricky on the posting end of things, but we typically see it as something that we know that we're going to have to do ahead of time.
Sure. So in this particular incident, the fuel spill incident, how do you know when it's safe to reopen? I know we got the word yesterday about 7:30 in the morning that the shellfish areas were open again. So what's the protocol for deciding whether it's the spill didn't have a huge impact and it's okay once again to open it to shellfishing?
That call is ultimately made by Division of Marine Fisheries. They're the ones that come out and assess the severity of the situation. They're the ones that look at, the spill, how well was it cleaned up, how large an area was impacted, and we wait to hear from them. So they're actually the ones that do all of that sort of background work to reopen the area.
Great. And for rainfall closures, is there a specific period of time that you wait before reopening, or is that determined on the amount of rain that actually does fall?
So typically, if we're getting 4 inches of rain in a 24-hour period out here on Cape, there are a number of rainfall closures that are going on simultaneously around the state. And so it's literally a function of how quickly you can get Division of Marine Fisheries to come down to do water testing that then shows that the water has returned to a normal state, and that would mean that those shellfish are then reharvestable. So it typically, from the day that we have the closure, is at least 5 days before an area would reopen again.
Great. So what's the protocol for if someone is to experience a fuel spill or notice a fuel spill? What's the protocol for notification for them to contact you?
So this specifically pertains to spills that happen in our waters. There's a different sort of scenario that happens for spills that are on the ground. But my department mostly responds to Marine Environmental Affairs, spills that happen immediately in the water. So you can call your local harbor master department. Here, the number is 508-790-6273.